This video is for anyone who thinks that you can't afford kids unless you're making six figures. It's also for the parents who believe they both have to work in order to afford a baby. There seems to be this pervasive myth out there that having a child is prohibitively expensive, that only the rich or the upper class can afford kids. This is total fear-mongering. As someone who has a child and whose wife is a stay-at-home mom, I'm going to show you with real numbers how it's possible to have a child on an income of $50K a year. Does it take planning, budgeting, and sacrifice? Yes. Is everyone willing to do these things? No. We live in a consumer culture, and making sacrifices and operating off of a budget is countercultural. Yet, millions of parents across the US are able to do it on this level of income. And before you say to yourself, there's no way you'd be able to do this in New York City or the Bay Area, I'll address that later in this video. Now, why do I use $50K as my annual income? Well, it's a nice round number, and it's also below the median income for an individual American working full-time. Specifically, it's below the median income of an American male working full-time between the ages of 25 to 34, which is roughly $63K a year based on the current Bureau of Labor Statistics. I purposefully did not want to use the typical income. I wanted to use an income below it to underscore my overall point that having a child is not impossible on a below median income. For my assumptions, I'm going to assume that this household has two married adults. Now, this couple is smart. They've already discussed having a baby before they got married, and they've determined that it's in the best interest of the baby for the mom to stay at home and raise the kid. That already eliminates the need for childcare. This also means that it would be the husband that is earning $50K a year as the sole earner once the baby comes. Because of this, they are going to base their budget around that income alone, both during the preparation phase before having a kid and after the baby is born. Let's also assume that this couple is in their late 20s, say 28 or 29, when they have their first kid, which is about the average age in the US. And let's say that they got married at 26 or 27, which means they waited about 2 years before trying for a kid, which is not uncommon. Now, let's first see what their take-home pay would be at $50K before having a kid. This varies depending on where you live, but I'll use the area that I grew up in, which is the Portland metro area. Oregon is known for its high tax burden, with our state income tax being one of the highest in the nation. And the Portland metro area's cost of living is higher than the national average. So there are already some factors that are working against us. Two married adults filing jointly would bring home about $3,400 a month, assuming no deductions, meaning no retirement, no health insurance, and no tax refund when they file taxes next year. Let's look at rent costs. After looking at suburbs around the Portland metro area, I found a one-bedroom apartment for $1,300 in an apartment complex about 15 minutes from downtown Portland. Like a lot of apartment complexes, it includes water, sewer, and garbage, but for our budgeting purposes, I'll include some of those amounts back in and adjust rent to $1,400. That leaves us with $2,000 a month for living expenses after rent. Next is health insurance. For two adults in their late 20s, a bronze ACA plan with an out-of-pocket max of $7,100 comes out to $250 a month. There are actually cheaper plans out there, but I chose to go with one that had a lower out-of-pocket max, since it's possible that labor and delivery will exceed the out-of-pocket max. Let's make groceries and household items come out to $750 a month, which is totally reasonable for two adults. Now we have $1,000 left. For other utilities and internet, let's make it $250. For phone, let's do $80. Now we're down to $670. Now let's get to transportation, gas, and insurance. Because this couple is in their mid to late 20s, if they've needed a car since their early 20s, it's not unreasonable to assume that by this point, they have a paid-off car. I did by the time I was in my late 20s. I bought a car when I was 26 and paid it off before I turned 30. It was a 2012 Corolla, and even after we got married and had our first child, we used that as our primary vehicle until our daughter was 2.5 years old. And when we decided we needed a bigger car because we were about to have our second child, we bought a used SUV in cash. So don't tell me that you need an SUV or a minivan the moment you have a kid. Frankly, this is one of the biggest financial traps that most people fall into, because a bigger car means more gas, more maintenance costs, and higher insurance. So if I use ourselves as an example, on a monthly basis, we spent about $200 a month on gas and insurance. Now we're down to $470. I'm going to take $170 of that and set aside for discretionary spending. This could be for eating out occasionally, buying gifts, buying clothes, a streaming service, or a cheap gym membership, which leaves $300 for saving and investing. If we split that into $150 for building or adding to an emergency fund and $150 for investing into a Roth IRA, then we've used up our entire budget for the month. This $300 also gives you some margin in the budget in case of an extra expense that randomly comes up. Oh, and this couple could create more margin by cutting down on some costs. For example, there are cheaper phone plans out there that you can also bundle with internet service, which could save $30 or more per month. Now, this is for a couple with no kids as of yet. You'll notice that I don't have anything in the budget for debt payments. Now, if you're going to have a $50K income after having a kid, your first priority before having a kid is getting rid of debt, especially any credit card debt, car loans, student loans, etc. The biggest priority out of all of these would be high interest debt, such as credit cards and private student loans. In my scenario, only one person is working in this household. If both adults are working, then keeping everything else the same, that extra income should be put towards debt. And if this couple married at 26 and has a kid at 28 or 29, that gives them 2.5 years of paying off debt before the baby comes. Obviously, this depends on how much debt this couple has, but let's say they have $40K in debt. If the spouse earns just $25K annually on top of the $50K already coming in, keeping all other budget items roughly the same and not allowing lifestyle creep, that's an additional $1,500 in take-home pay that can go directly towards paying off debt. And to clear out $40K in debt would take a little over 2 years. That is completely doable. There are some upfront costs that would need to be saved up for before having a child, like the cost of the birth and one-time purchases like a stroller, car seat, clothes, etc. Given that the insurance plan I mentioned earlier has a $7,100 out-of-pocket max, let's say that these upfront costs add up to $9,000. If both adults are working and making $75K but are budgeting off of an income of $50K, this amount could be saved in about 6 months. If the household is only making $50K and they're using both the $150 cash savings and $150 investing amounts to save for the baby, then it would take 2.5 years. If they started saving right after they got married and the baby is born 3 years later, then they would have saved enough money to pay for the delivery and baby costs before the baby is born. And by the way, the median household income for a married couple in the 25 to 34 age range is $90K, so $75K is still below the median. Once debt is taken off the table, money is saved, and the baby is now here, let's now take a look at the budget once more. Again, childcare is taken care of because mom is now a stay-at-home mom. At $50K and a child, their take-home pay increases due to a number of factors, assuming this couple adjusts their withholding to increase their take-home pay now, as opposed to getting a refund when filing taxes the year after. Factor number 1, this couple now qualifies for the child tax credit, which as of 2026 is $2,200. And at this income, they also qualify for the Earned Income Tax Credit at both the federal and Oregon levels, and an additional personal exemption in Oregon taxes. This equates to a take-home pay of about $3,700 per month instead of $3,400, which means that we have about $300 more in our budget. So what additional costs would this couple have to pay for this new baby? Now here is what separates this couple from many others. They're already used to running lean, and so their priorities are centered on what the baby actually needs right now, as opposed to what the baby might need in the future or what the adults want. The fact is that a baby does not need a bigger car. As I already explained earlier, we drove my 2012 Corolla for the first 2.5 years of my toddler's life. Not once did we believe the car was a death trap, and it fulfilled all of our needs at the time. The baby also does not need a bigger space. The fact is that a baby, especially before they walk and crawl, will either be physically attached to you for most of their waking hours or sleeping. Contrary to what Instagram might tell you, they don't need a separate room or a nursery. My wife and I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment when our daughter was born, and for most of her life, including now, we all slept together in the same room. Room sharing with a baby is common both historically and across much of the world. Having a baby sleep in a separate room is a modern invention. So let's look at the baby's needs. At $50K, this baby would qualify for Oregon's Medicaid plan, which means that their health insurance and most of their medical costs would be zero. And from what I've read online, at this income, this baby would qualify for free or low-cost health coverage in nearly every state in the US. The other cost would be food. Some babies are exclusively breastfed, which means that formula costs would be zero and grocery costs might increase a bit. Some babies are exclusively formula fed. In this case, formula costs would be about $200 a month, and that's usually until they can start eating solids, which happens at around 6 months old. So that would take $200 away from the extra $300 coming in. That extra $100 could then be used towards diapers, wipes, secondhand clothes and toys, and other items. Contrary to popular belief, while diapers are a recurring cost until they're potty trained, diapers don't exactly break the bank, especially if you use generic brands. For example, as of right now, a box of 96 size 1 diapers at Costco is $15. Oh, and by the way, since the infant qualifies for Oregon's Medicaid plan, they automatically qualify for WIC benefits, which means that if they use formula, their formula costs would be significantly reduced. And that's pretty much it when it comes to needs. The fact is that you can make baby costs as expensive as you want them to be. You could use a name brand formula or a specialty formula. You can get extra lavish diapers, new toys, designer baby clothes, you name it. But having a baby does not have to be expensive. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, some of you might object to this scenario by pointing out that it isn't possible in New York City, the Bay Area, or whatever expensive city you think of. I would counter that by saying that expensive cities are not representative of most of the country. What's funny is that a lot of people in their 20s and 30s call so-called boomers out of touch, when in reality, being out of touch cuts both ways. A $1,400 rent payment is an above average payment in most of the country, like for example in much of the Midwest, the South, and in suburbs outside major metro areas. Now you might say, well, I wouldn't want to live there. And there's that word, want. You see, this couple that I showed you, they're wise. They understand that when you have a child, the child's needs take priority. And the best thing that you can give your child is your presence. Who is the best caretaker for your child? You or a minimum wage daycare worker? So cut your expenses, move to a cheaper place, move cities if you have to. Do whatever it takes to give your child the best start to life. Don't let your wants take priority over the child's needs. And another thing, if you're planning on raising a family on $50K, you're likely not going to choose to live in an expensive city anyway. Nobody has to live in an expensive city. You have a choice, and with this income, the decision is pretty clear. And because $50K is below the median, that level of income is very achievable even in low cost of living areas. And that's the thing about wants. Before you have a kid, especially if you're dual income. Your wants can dominate your budget, or even exceed your monthly income if you're not careful. For this hypothetical couple, imagine if their lifestyle inflated to fit a 75K income rather than a 50K income. A bigger place in a more expensive part of town, a newer car, eating out more often. You get used to it. So to then think about adding a child into the mix while still maintaining that lifestyle would obviously strain the budget. But what's great about having a kid is you can plan ahead of time, which is what this couple did, all while on a below median income. Just think about how bright the future is for this couple. They've learned to live on a budget and execute a plan. And I didn't even mention the most obvious variable, which is that the main earner could potentially earn more income. Just because they start with 50K doesn't mean that they have to stay at that income forever. And as kids get older and more money needs to be spent, the income growth would offset that. And once the kid or kids are in school, the mom could work as well. Anyway, there's a lot more that I could say about this topic, and there's probably more objections that I could address. But this video has gone on long enough. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and for those of you who have raised kids on a tight budget, I'd love to hear your experience. I'll end this video with the verse from Proverbs. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. See you in the next one.